You know those incredible moments where you're just in the zone? Everything clicks and it all feels, well, effortless. And then, of course, there are those other moments where every single thing feels like an uphill battle. Today, we're going to dive into a really cool concept called structural coherence that explains exactly why that happens. So, let's start with a question I think we've all asked ourselves. Why is it that sometimes the harder you try, the worse things seem to get? You're pushing, you're focusing, you're giving it everything you've got, but instead of things getting clearer, the whole problem just gets muddier. It's so frustrating, right? Well, this is a classic pattern we can call the effort trap. It's this bizarre cycle where the more effort you pour in, the more trapped you feel, like your options are just shrinking in real time. You lose that mental flexibility, and somehow you wind up more confused than when you started. But what if this isn't about you? What if it's not a personal failure, but just a predictable process? To really understand this trap, and more importantly, how to get out of it, we need to bring in a powerful new idea from a field called structural cognition. So let's define this key term: coherence. Okay, here it is. Coherence is the degree to which a cognitive system stays structurally aligned under load. Now, think of it like a bridge. Structurally aligned just means all the parts are working together perfectly. Under load is all the stress and traffic on that bridge. The key thing to get here is that we're not talking about a feeling. Coherence is an architectural property, kind of like how well built that bridge is. And this is super important, so let's be really clear about what coherence is not. It's not the feeling of being calm, it's not confidence, and it's not emotional regulation. Now, all those things might be the awesome results of having a coherent system, but they aren't coherence itself. Coherence is the underlying structural integrity that makes it all possible. And you can really see the difference it makes here, side by side. A coherent system, it can take on a heavy mental load and distribute it without getting all bent out of shape. It keeps access to tons of different pathways and ideas. But a system that's losing coherence, well, it has to go into survival mode. It's forced to simplify, to narrow its focus. Your options literally collapse, and your behavior can get stuck in a repetitive. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of how this actually works. We're going to look at why that stuck feeling happens and exactly how putting a load on your system can actually reduce your options. Here's a really crucial point. Coherence doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is always coherence under load. Think about it. A system that's just sitting there with no demands on it doesn't need to be coherent at all. It's only when you actually challenge that system, with a tough problem or a tight deadline, that you reveal how coherent it really is. And this right here perfectly explains that downward spiral we were talking about. So picture this. Your system is already getting close to its limit. You think, okay, I just need to try harder. But what does trying harder actually mean? Well, it usually means you start monitoring yourself, evaluating every little step. But that self-monitoring, that's a whole other cognitive task in itself. It just adds more load to your already strained system, pushing it over the edge and causing coherence to drop even faster. And this leads us to a really profound shift in how we see things. The source material puts it perfectly. Effort is not wrong. It is simply structurally expensive. Wow. It's not about being virtuous or lazy. It's a high-cost cognitive action. And just thinking about it that way, it changes everything. So what's the currency we're spending here? Well, you could call it topological width. That's just a fancy way of saying the number of different pathways, ideas, and alternatives you have available at any given moment. High coherence means your topological width is broad and expansive. Low coherence, on the other hand, narrows it down dramatically, leaving you stuck with just one or two obvious, well-worn paths. All right, so this brings us to what I think is the biggest, most powerful reframe of all. It's about learning to see our internal states not as personal failures, but as really important signals. This right here is the big aha moment. Confusion, friction, and effort are not the opposite of intelligence. They are signals of coherent strain. Let that sink in. That feeling of struggle, of friction, it's not a sign that you're dumb or lazy. It's just objective data. It's a little warning light on your dashboard telling you that the system structure is under too much load. And just look at the difference this makes in how we talk to ourselves. The old way is all self-criticism. Ugh, I'm so lazy, or I just need more willpower. But the structural reframe? It's a neutral, technical observation. The system's topology has narrowed, or the system is under excessive load. It completely removes all that judgment and pressure. So you might be wondering, what about all that good stuff we're always chasing, like motivation or inspiration? Well, according to this model, they are effects, not causes. Motivation just shows up when your mental pathways are open and available. Insight arrives when all that structural distortion is gone. The point is, you can't force them to happen. You can only create the conditions for them to emerge naturally. This table is so useful because it draws a really sharp line between two things we often confuse: control and coherence. We think being in control is the goal, right? But control relies on constant monitoring and correction, which, as we now know, is structurally expensive. It literally consumes coherence. A truly coherent system, on the other hand, reduces the need for that kind of rigid control. And that's exactly why being in control often feels so tight and rigid, while being in a state of coherence feels free and completely effortless. So, if there's one crucial takeaway from all of this, it's that we can't force our way into a state of clarity. The real goal is to seek alignment before we try to take action. And you have to burn this into your brain. Coherence cannot be commanded. You can't just grit your teeth and will it to happen. It's an emergent property. It just shows up on its own when all the structural conditions, the task, your environment, your internal state, are properly aligned. This quote just wraps it all up so perfectly. Coherence precedes effectiveness. Not because coherence is virtuous, but because alignment reduces cost. That's it. When your system is aligned, taking action is cheap, it's easy, it's effective. The goal isn't to be some good, coherent person. The goal is just to find the alignment that makes everything else fall into place. So I'm going to leave you with a final thought to chew on. We spend so much energy trying to become more disciplined, more focused. But what if that's the wrong goal entirely? What if the real aim is to simply create the conditions where that kind of forced focus becomes completely and beautifully unnecessary?